Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. And today we're taking a closer look at two absolute titans in the world of Islamic law. We're talking about Imam Malik ibn Anas and Imam al-Shafi'i. And we're going to be using this awesome series, The Four Imams of Fiqh, Leaves and Legacies, as our main guide.
Yeah, and this series, it really dives deep. I mean, we're going to explore their lives from their early days, their education, the unique approaches they developed. We'll also touch on, some of the challenges they faced and the lasting impact they've had on how we understand Islamic law even to this day.
I'm really excited to unpack all of that and really, get to the heart of why these scholars are still so relevant. I want to figure out what their key contributions were, what made them stand out, and hey, maybe we'll stumble upon a few surprises along the way. Think of this as like your fast track to understanding why these figures are still so important in the world of Islamic law. So where should we kick things off? I think it makes sense to start with Imam Malik. What do you think?
Sounds good. So Imam Malik ibn Anas was born in Medina in 711 CE, which is 93 AH. Now, the place he was born, it's not just some random detail. Medina was the heart of the Prophet Muhammad's life, peace be upon him. Growing up there, I mean, you can imagine how much that influenced his whole understanding of Islam.
You're totally right. You can practically feel that history all around him.
hmm
And the series, it makes it very clear that his early years were just immersed in religious learning. I mean, memorizing the entire Quran, that is a monumental task in and of itself. And he didn't stop there. He dove headfirst into the study of hadith, the Prophet's sayings and actions, and also fiqh, that's Islamic jurisprudence, right?
Exactly. And his connection to that early period, it's even deeper than you might think. His grandfather, Abu Amir, was actually a companion of the Prophet Muhammad. That means he had a direct link to the very first generation of Muslims. Imagine the kind of insights that connection would have provided.
Wow. That's like having a living, breathing link to the very beginnings of Islam. Incredible. This series also talks about some of the brilliant minds who taught him in Medina. We're talking about people like Nafi. He was a super respected narrator of hadith, a former slave of Ibn Umar. Ibn Umar was another very influential companion of the Prophet. And then, of course, there was Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri. This guy was like a leading hadith scholar of his time. Oh, and let's not forget Rabia al-Ray. He was known for his super sharp legal reasoning. So Imam Malik, he was literally surrounded by giants in the field.
What's really cool is Imam Malik's, core philosophy on knowledge. He's got this famous quote, "Knowledge is not what is memorized, knowledge is what benefits." That really shows you what he was all about. It wasn't just about memorizing stuff. It was about understanding it at a deep level and then using it, applying it in a way that actually made a difference. That's a really practical approach. Even today, it's incredibly relevant.
Totally. So let's get into what made Imam Malik's legal methodology so unique. The series highlights his heavy reliance on what's called Amal al-Medina. That translates to the practices of the people of Medina. Now, that sounds a little different, right?
It is. This was a distinctive aspect of his thinking. Imam Malik, he saw those practices, the established customs of the people of Medina, as like a living, breathing embodiment of the Sunnah, the Prophet's way. Because Medina had such strong connections to the Prophet and his companions, he believed that their consensus and customs, the way they lived their lives, held real weight in legal matters. But it wasn't just about observing what people did. It was about scholars carefully examining those practices to make sure they aligned with the true spirit of the Prophet's teachings.
So alongside the Quran and the Sunnah, which are the bedrock of Islamic law for everyone, Imam Malik places special emphasis on this living tradition of Medina. It was like another key source for him. But he didn't just stop there. He used other principles in his legal reasoning, right?
Yeah, definitely. In addition to the Quran and Sunnah, and of course the Amal al-Madina, he used ijma. That's the consensus among scholars on a specific legal point. Then there was qiyas. This is analogical reasoning, meaning you look at existing legal rulings to tackle new issues that share some of the same underlying principles. And what's really fascinating is that he also factored in maslaha, that's public interest or welfare. So he was taking that into account when he made his legal judgments.
Wow. It sounds like he had a very thorough and nuanced system. And of course, we can't talk about Imam Malik without talking about his monumental work, the Muwatta. The series describes it as, well, it says it's early and really well respected.
The thing is, the Muwatta is not just a book of hadith. It's way more than that. He included his own legal rulings in it. Plus, it documented the established practices of the community in Medina. So in a way, he brought all those core elements of his legal approach together in one single super important book. It was foundational.
Now, we know that the life of a scholar, it's not always easy. And the theories does mention a pretty significant challenge that Imam Malik faced. It's a moment that really shows us just how strong his principles were.
Oh, yeah. This is powerful. So, Imam Malik, he actually got flogged, like physically punished. Why? Because he gave a fatwa, a legal opinion, that went against what the Abbasid Caliph wanted. Think about that for a second. He risked his own safety to stand up for what he believed in. That tells you everything you need to know about his courage. He was completely dedicated to his understanding of Islamic law, even if it meant suffering for it.
That's pretty amazing. It speaks volumes about his integrity. The series mentions that he died in Medina in 795 CE, which is 179 AH. And even though his life was centered in Medina, his influence, it reached far beyond that city.
Oh, for sure. The Maliki school of thought, the madhab that came from his teachings, it became the dominant school in North and West Africa. Even today, it's the main legal tradition in countries like Morocco, Algeria, Mali. That shows you just how lasting his scholarship really is. So we've covered Imam Malik, but now let's switch gears. Let's talk about Imam al-Shafi'i. This is where things get super interesting, because his story starts off really differently.
I'm all ears. Imam al-Shafi'i's early life, it was definitely not the same as Imam Malik's. I mean, he was born in Gaza in 767 CE. That's a 150 AH. And our sources say he faced a lot of hardship early on. His dad passed away when he was young, and his mom moved him to Mecca, where they lived in poverty.
That's right. But even with all those challenges, Imam al-Shafi'i, he showed incredible intellectual abilities from when he was a kid. It's kind of mind-blowing, actually. The series says he memorized the whole Quran by the time he was 7 years old. That's wild. And get this, by 10, he had Imam Malik's Muwatta memorized too. That's dedication right there. His commitment to learning from such a young age, it's really something else.
Seriously impressive. And his journey for knowledge, it didn't end in Mecca. The series goes into his extensive travels, and those travels played a massive role in shaping his thinking. Eventually, he got to study with Imam Malik in Medina, which must have been a huge moment for him. But he didn't stop there, did he?
Not even close. He traveled all over, Iraq, Yemen, and finally Egypt. And each place exposed him to different ways of thinking about law, different scholarly traditions. For example, in Iraq, he studied with Muhammad al-Shamani. It was a big deal. A student of Imam Abu Hanifa, and Abu Hanifa, as you may know, he founded another one of the major schools of Islamic law. Imam al-Shafi'i also learned from Sufyan ibn Uyana, a really respected hadith scholar in Mecca. This exposure to so many different approaches, it was a key part of what made his own approach so unique and influential.
So, while Imam Malik's thinking was deeply connected to that Madinan tradition, Imam al-Shafi'i experienced a much broader intellectual world. He engaged with all these different schools of thought. And this takes us to his massive contributions to Islamic law, particularly his title as the father of Usul al-Fiqh. Now, what does that even mean?
It means he really earned that title. Imam al-Shafi'i is known as the first scholar who really sat down and systematically organized the principles of Islamic jurisprudence, what we call usul al-fiqh. He wasn't just building legal arguments, he was creating the rules of the game. He figured out the foundational guidelines and methods for how you're actually supposed to derive and understand Islamic law. It was a total game changer. It brought clarity and structure to the whole field of Islamic law like never before.
The series also points out how he focused on the sources of Islamic law. He agreed about the importance of the Quran and the Sunnah, but his views on the other sources, well, they differed a bit from what some earlier scholars thought.
That's right. So, like Imam Malik, he saw ijma, the consensus of the Muslim community, and qiyas, analogical reasoning, as valid sources. But here's the big difference. He wasn't cool with istisan. That's juristic preference, something that some scholars before him had used. Imam al-Shafi'i mostly rejected it because he felt it could make legal rulings too subjective, based on someone's personal opinion. And that, to him, was dangerous because it could potentially steer people away from the core sources, the Quran and the Sunnah. He was all about sticking to those primary sources, to ijma, and to clear, well-defined principles of analogical reasoning. That was how he thought you could get more objective legal rulings.
That shift towards a more structured approach is huge. And you can see it in his most famous books, which the series mentions. There's Al-Risala and Al-Can you break down why those books are so important?
Sure. Al-Risala is his masterpiece on usul al-fiqh. This is where he really carefully laid out the principles of interpreting and deriving Islamic law. He explained his ideas about how important the Sunnah is, the role of consensus, and how you're supposed to use analogical reasoning correctly. Now, that's a different beast. It's this giant compilation of all his legal rulings on huge range of topics. And in it, he's directly applying those principles that he set out in Al-Risala. Together, those two books are like a 1-2 punch. They totally reshaped how people thought about and practiced Islamic law. His influence is still felt centuries later.
It's amazing how both of these imams lived pretty close in time, but they came up with such different yet impactful approaches to Islamic law. It's like they were looking at the same thing, but seeing it in completely different ways. The series says Imam al-Shafi'i died in Egypt in 820 CE, that's 204 AH, and like Imam Malik, his impact went way beyond where he lived.
Totally. The Shafi school of thought, it was adopted in all sorts of places. Southeast Asia, East Africa, parts of the Middle East. It became super widespread, which tells you something about how powerful and clear his legal system was. So, looking back at these two incredible individuals, what do you think are the most important things to take away from their contrasting legacies? What makes their stories so compelling?
For me, it's really fascinating that Imam Malik's legacy is so deeply rooted in the traditions and everyday life of the people in Medina. It shows just how important he thought historical practice was, and how a community's understanding could actually be a source of law. On the flip side, you have Imam al-Shafi'i. His legacy is all about creating a clear, systematic framework for Islamic law. He wanted to figure out a way to make legal rulings that could be applied more universally.
That's a really important distinction. One was all about the specific historical context and the practices of the Prophet's community, while the other focused on building a legal method that could be applied more broadly. And, even though their approaches were different, the series really highlights how much they both valued knowledge and how they never gave up, even when things got tough. Both of these imams, they were dedicated to understanding and teaching Islam. Their commitment was rock solid.
Their influence is undeniable. I mean, just look at how far their schools of thought spread. Even now, they're shaping how millions of Muslims understand and practice law all around the world.
That's for sure. So to sum it all up, we've got Imam Malik, the scholar deeply connected to the traditions of Medina. To him, that was a living, breathing source of legal guidance. And then there's Imam al-Shafi'i, the architect who built the framework of Islamic legal theory. The guy who created a systematic way to understand and apply God's law.
So now, this is where you come in, dear listener. It's time to think about this. How do you see both of these approaches? Imam Malik's emphasis on historical practice, and Imam al-Shafi'i's focus on systematic reasoning, influencing how we understand religious law today. And it doesn't even have to be limited to religious law. How about other fields of knowledge? What about your own life? What can we learn from their journeys, from their dedication to knowledge and their unwavering commitment to their principles? That's something to ponder, don't you think?
Yeah, it's really thought-provoking stuff. And if this whole discussion about Imam Malik and Imam al-Shafi'i has piqued your interest and you're ready to learn more, well, stick around. In our upcoming deep dives, we're planning to explore the other two major imams from this series, Abu Hanifa and Ahmad ibn Hanbal. They've got amazing stories too. So until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those questions coming. All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep, really deep into something so vital for Muslims around the world, how they understand and practice their faith.
That's right, and we're talking about Islamic jurisprudence, or as it's known in Arabic, fiqh.
It's more than just a set of rules, though, right? It's like the roadmap, the practical guidance that comes from the core principles of Islam.
Absolutely. It's about how Muslims can live their daily lives in line with their beliefs, covering everything from prayer and fasting to financial dealings and family matters. It's really quite intricate, and it's got a fascinating history and a whole lot of intellectual depth.
And speaking of intellectual giants, we're focusing on a pioneer today, a towering figure in the development of fiqh. We're going to be exploring the life and work of none other than Imam Abu Hanifa.
He's considered the founder, the driving force behind the Hanafi school of thought, the Hanafi madhab, which is one of the most prominent and followed schools of fiqh in the world.
And for this deep dive, we're drawing on the four Imams of Islamic jurisprudence. It's a great source, really sheds light on his life, his methods, the challenges he faced, and of course the lasting impact he had.
It's a rich portrait of a man who shaped Islamic legal thought in a way that still resonates today.
So our big question today, the one we're really grappling with, is why is Imam Abu Hanifa so important in the history of Islamic law? What was it about his approach that made it so influential? And how is it that his school of thought still influences the understanding of Islam for millions upon millions of Muslims? Let's start, I think, with a journey back to his beginnings.
His early life.
Yeah, like where and when he was born, what the world was like back then.
That's a good place to start, absolutely.
Imam Abu Hanifa was born in Kufa.
Which is in modern-day Iraq.
Right, Iraq during the Umayyad Caliphate. And this wasn't just some backwater town, Kufa was buzzing. It was a center of intellectual activity, like a crossroads of ideas.
It had such strong connections to the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, those who knew him and learned directly from him.
So you can imagine the atmosphere. This was a place where knowledge, especially religious knowledge, was highly valued.
From a young age, he was surrounded by this vibrant, intellectual and spiritual atmosphere, constantly exposed to debates and discussions about Islamic teachings. It was a city steeped in the earliest traditions of Islam.
His family background played a role too, right?
Absolutely. His family, of Persian origin, was quite well off, which meant he didn't have to worry about working. He could focus all his energy on learning.
That must have been a huge advantage, to have that kind of freedom to just immerse himself in his studies.
It was. But it wasn't just about the privilege. Our source emphasizes his humility, his sincere desire to learn and seek the truth.
So it wasn't a sense of entitlement, it was more like a deep thirst for knowledge.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this picture of his upbringing, this intellectually charged environment. Who were some of the people who really shaped his thinking, his teachers?
His education was actually very broad. He didn't just focus on Islamic law. He delved into theology, philosophy, logic.
Wow, a real polymath.
He was, and I think that's one of the things that made him so insightful, being able to see things from different angles. That exposure to various disciplines helped him hone his analytical skills, his ability to think critically.
It's like all those different fields of study came together and informed his approach to Islamic law. But in terms of his teachers in Fiqh, who were the most influential figures?
Well, one name stands out, Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman. He was a leading scholar of Islamic jurisprudence in Kufa, and Abu Hanifa spent close to 2 decades studying under him.
Wow, 20 years. That's a serious commitment.
It is, and it shows just how much Abu Hanifa valued his teacher's knowledge and guidance. He absorbed those core principles of Islamic law during those years.
What happened after Hamad passed away? Did Abu Hanifa just continue on his own?
No, he actually took over Hamad's study circle, and according to our source, that circle became like a magnet for students and scholars, a real hub of Islamic legal thought in Kufa.
He really stepped into those shoes.
He did. But what's really interesting is that he didn't just stay in Kufa. He traveled to other major centers of learning, places like Mecca and Medina.
Making those pilgrimages, absorbing knowledge from different schools of thought.
Exactly. He wanted to learn from the best, and he knew that meant seeking out knowledge wherever it could be found. In Mecca, he spent time with Atta ibn Abi Rabah, a very respected scholar, and in Medina, he had the opportunity to learn from Imam Jafar al-Sadiq.
Who was a descendant of the Prophet, right?
Yes, the great-grandson.
Wow, that's an incredible lineage. So those travels must have really broadened his perspectives, given him a deeper understanding of hadith, the sayings and traditions of the Prophet, and how different regions were approaching Islamic law.
They did. And all of this shaped the unique approach that he would become known for.
And this is where we get into the heart of his contributions, right? His methodology and innovations in Islamic jurisprudence. So let's talk about one of the most revolutionary concepts he introduced, istihsan, often translated as juristic preference. For those who might not be familiar with this term, could you break it down a little?
Sure. So istihsan allows a jurist, a legal scholar, to depart from strict qiyas, which is analogical reasoning, in cases where following qiyas too rigidly might lead to an outcome that's unfair or goes against the spirit of Islamic justice.
So it's not just about applying a rule blindly, it's about considering the context and making sure the outcome is truly just.
Exactly. It's about looking deeper, understanding the objectives of Islamic law, and making a judgment based on those principles. It's about prioritizing fairness and equity.
And our source gives a great example about trade and commerce. Abu Hanifa, he often put fairness at the forefront, even if it meant setting aside a strict, literal interpretation of an existing legal precedent.
That's right. He recognized that sometimes, to achieve true justice, you need to go beyond just mechanically applying a rule.
It's about looking at the bigger picture, right? The purpose and spirit of the law. And it wasn't just istihsan, right? He also placed a strong emphasis on ray, personal reasoning, and ijtihad, independent legal reasoning. How did these ideas contribute to his overall approach?
Well, these concepts emphasize the vital role of intellect, of deep thought and engagement with the primary sources of Islamic law, the Quran and the Sunnah, the Prophet's practices. Ray is like applying your intellect, rooted in those sources, to find rulings on things that aren't explicitly spelled out.
Like filling in the gaps, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And Etihad, that's the broader effort, the endeavor of qualified scholars to interpret and apply Islamic law to new situations. And this emphasis on independent thought, on reasoning things out, it's a big reason why the Hanafi school became so adaptable.
And adaptable it was. As our source mentions, the Hanafi madhab, it became the dominant school of thought in diverse and complex regions like the Ottoman Empire and South Asia.
Think about it. A legal system that has that built-in flexibility is going to be better equipped to deal with different cultures, changing times.
It makes sense, right? It can adapt to the needs of different societies and evolve as those societies evolve.
Exactly. His methodology allowed Islamic law to stay relevant and applicable over time and in different places. It wasn't stuck in a rigid set of rules that might not work in every situation.
So he wasn't just passively receiving knowledge, he was actively interpreting and shaping it, finding ways to address the real challenges of his time. But that must have caused some friction, right? I mean, introducing new ideas, challenging the status quo, those things often come with pushback.
They do. And Imam Abu Hanifa faced his share of challenges, especially from those in power. He was a man of principle, and he wasn't afraid to stand up for what he believed in, even when it meant going against the grain.
Our source talks about his refusal to serve as a judge. And it wasn't just once, was it? It was under both the Umayyad and the Abbasid caliphates.
He had deep concerns about maintaining his independence, his ability to make judgments based on his understanding of Islamic law.
He didn't want to be beholden to political pressures.
Right, exactly. He felt that accepting a position as a judge appointed by the ruler might compromise his integrity.
That takes courage, standing by your principles like that.
It does. And unfortunately, his stance led to some pretty harsh consequences. He was imprisoned, and our source even mentions that he was subjected to torture for his beliefs.
It's hard to even imagine what he must have gone through, but even in the face of all that, he didn't waver.
His commitment to his understanding of justice and Islamic law, it was unwavering.
So we see this scholar, this pioneer of Islamic legal thought facing adversity, yet his teachings continue to spread. He passes away in the year 767 CE, or 150 AH, but his legacy doesn't die with him, does it?
Not at all. His students, especially Abu Yusuf and Muhammad al-Shaybani, they played a crucial role in preserving and spreading his teachings.
They were like his intellectual heirs.
In a way, yes.
Yep.
They took on the responsibility of codifying his legal opinions, documenting his teachings, really laying the groundwork for the Hanafi school to flourish.
And flourish it did. It's incredible, according to our source, that the Hanafi school, it's followed by about a third of the world's Muslims today.
That makes it the largest of the four major Sunni schools of thought, a testament to the lasting power of his ideas.
His work impacted millions upon millions of lives, and it still does.
And it goes to show you the strength and adaptability of his methodology.
So to recap, we've traced the journey of Imam Abu Hanifa from his upbringing in that intellectually vibrant city of Kufa through his rigorous education, his key mentors, his innovative approach to Islamic jurisprudence, his unwavering commitment to justice, even in the face of hardship. His legacy, carefully preserved by his students, continues to shape how a significant portion of Muslims worldwide understand and practice their faith.
He didn't just give a set of rules, he created a framework, a methodology for understanding and applying Islamic law that could adapt and endure over time.
And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from this deep dive. But before we wrap up, we want to leave you with something to ponder.
A food for thought, as they say.
Something to chew on.
Think about this. How did the development of this flexible legal reasoning that Abu Hanifa pioneered allow Islamic law to work across different cultures and historical periods? And what can we learn from that adaptability when we look at legal systems today, not just in Islam, but across the world?
That's something to think about. How do we balance the need for consistency and the weight of tradition with the need to be flexible, to respond to new challenges and contexts?
It's a question that's relevant to any legal system that wants to remain just and applicable in a changing world.
Great point. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
And until our next exploration.
Take care.
Bye-bye.